Dumbe, dumbade, dumbadi, dumbe dumbo, dumbade, dumbada, dumbadi, dumbe dumbi. The greatest story ever told is the story you tell about yourself. It's been a long time coming. I have intended to re-record this offering of my origin story as a gift to some of the ones that I have worked with and walked with over the past years. But more so recently, I just turned 49. And I originally recorded my origin story at 44. And it was the first time really for myself even. It was for myself at that time. Speaking about what my earth side entry and life has been. At that time, it was really important for me. There was a huge initiation that I had just walked through, and it was a really important piece of my healing to speak with my own words to the wholeness of my story. Now, in doing that, I recorded it at a time which, for me, in my work as a midwife, as a womb shaman, as a channel, I always have sound and music, and I just follow my inspiration, instigation, and flow. And at the time that I recorded that, I had a piece of music that was copyrighted. I didn't pay any attention to it. It just felt really part of the flow. And I think I left the storytelling up for about a year on the podcast, and then also some specific private groups. And then I took it down because I knew I didn't need it. Like, I knew for my own piece of peace, it wasn't necessary. And instead of, trying to edit it, or I don't even know how to do it, nor do I have any interest in that. I was like, fine, it served its purpose. Cool. And I know for myself, I work with so many different souls, not only connected to adoption. There's so many realms in so many lands and so many different ways that I walk with and work with different beings. So what has happened in the last 5 years is the souls that have found me as a result of me leaving that story up for 1 year. It's like all of these beings on so many levels reached out and found their way to me. So I promised a client recently that I would reshare my origin story to the best of my ability in this now moment. And I think it's taken me also the amount of time that it's taken to re-record this, because the story doesn't even seem so interesting to me anymore. It's not so relevant to my daily life, and yet it is my story. There's a saying that says, stand on your story, not in it. And I am one that even for people that meet me in many different realms and countries and different scenarios, they can't even fathom the things that I've witnessed, that I've walked through, and that I've lived, because it isn't woven into my being in a way of trauma, right? Which is also, for me, it's a huge testament and a deep bow to myself in the sense of my own healing, integration, and holing. And I'm truly grateful. But this time, as I record the greatest story ever told, I'm doing it for a couple of my clients that have asked, as well as Yeah, this time I'm hearing loud and clear that it's not for you. Like every time, even just throughout my work weeks and how I spend my days and all of that, it hasn't taken a top priority. And just recently, I got the message loud and clear that said, it's not about you. I need you to tell your origin story and publish it and share it for the others. So, here we go. Here we grow. My origin story. So, I was born in 1976 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and given up for adoption, and spent the first 3 months of my life in foster care. And then I was adopted by 2 beings that became my adoptive parents. German, American, I think Polish American, and my ethnicity by blood that I know of from the social worker and in the files. I am Ethiopian, French, and Portuguese by blood. There could be some other elements in there that I'm not aware of. I have a brother who is also adopted. He's 3 years older than me. I think he is German American. He looks very much like the parents who raised me. So for me, and I'm going to tell this story without editing. I will say this, the first time that I did record it 4 or 5 years ago, even I remember when I listened to it again, because I'm huge with tonal alchemy. I can hear when I'm listening to somebody speak, I can hear what is integrated, what is still yet to be integrated. There is no judgment. It's just the fact that our voices hold so much power and so much in it, and it's an amazing tool for me in the work that I do. But I remember when I recorded it then, I could hear when I listened to it back, maybe 6 months or a year later. When I listened to it, I'm like, oh, I could hear the places that I was still healing, that I was still holding. And maybe that journey continues in whatever form, but I know at this age and stage, in the place that I'm at within my own being and body, I breathe and move really easily into all of the spaces that I am. And life, in the beautiful way that life literally shows you and shares with you and brings to you all the people and places and things that are meant to trigger more aspects of that healing or holding. But I remember at the time when I was listening to it back, I could feel what was yet to be integrated. And so now I will be curious. I rarely listen to things that I record back because I don't have time, and I spend a lot of time speaking and working with clients in ways that I just, other than just making sure that it recorded and that the sound is okay, I don't really spend a lot of time. But I will be curious to hear in my own being and to witness the growth in that. But I will say I edited a lot. I could hear that in the first offering 5 years ago. I was still kind of shielding and protecting. This time I'm not going to do that because I also am at peace with all of the dynamics and the relationships, even the current relationship with my adoptive parents and reality in so many ways. It's very beautiful. I actually think the story itself is profound, and all of the things that I have brought to completion in the ways that I know to do. The other thing that I'm not editing out in this offering, and I did it in the first recording, is that I minimized my role as a womb shaman. I minimized some of the things that I have since childhood been able to see into, in the sense of my clairvoyance, my gifts as a psychic channel, as a medium. I tried to stick just to the story. This time in my sharing, I'm going to cover a lot of different bases, because I don't only work with ones who have been orphaned or immigrants or different origin stories that kind of have a similar theme. I also work with parents who are having kids who may have been adopted, and they're connecting or they're healing. Their child is bringing through ancestral lineages that are calling for specific healing in different ways. I work with parents who are also wanting to understand their adopted children, or heal estrangement that has happened, or gain a better clarity in different ways. So this time in this recording, I'm not going to edit. I'm going to speak freely. And for the ones that can pick up what I'm putting down, you're welcome. And I'm going to just allow myself to speak freely. Okay, so that being said, I am somebody who, from a very young age, always was able to see into other dimensions, other realities. I understood and could see and know things that there was no way anybody told me those things. So that was also true in my experience as an adoptee, a multiracial adoptee, adopted by white parents. I was aware of situations and things that have happened, in their lives, without them telling me, which also, being that I was raised, there was an aspect of religion that was brought into the field that had nothing to do with who I am in my embodiment, right? I'm somebody that I respect anybody's choice to worship, and serve God in whatever way they choose. It's none of my business. And at the same time, my own energetic frequency is so deeply rooted in my own ancestral wisdom, in my embodiment and my spiritual attunement and connection to nature, to prime creator, source, God, goddess, absolute. It is my truth and my ancestry, my bloodline. There is so many beings that come through the one that I am. And so in that, being placed into a family that not only did I not look anything like, it was clear for me from the very beginning, I am in this family, but I am not of it. Which from my perspective, I will say, there's times where that has also felt like a really huge gift. Because even in some of the other realms, when I work and walk with different ones who have even, they don't have adoption, it's not anything like that, but yet they literally feel like the orphan or the black sheep in their own family, and it's their own bloodline. So again, I'm not limited to walking. The ones that are meant to connect with me and work with me are the ones that find me. And that's just what it is. That's how it's been since day one. But I will say the gift of my being with the parents who raised me, it was an initiation. It was a part of my origin. And because I have an understanding and I walked through a lot of different passages in my life, I can say at 49 years old, I'm not carrying this huge load of heaviness and baggage and trauma. The lightness and the ease at which I move through my life, and the joy that is my birthright as just being who I am. I like it. I wouldn't change it. I don't look back and, even things that I've navigated that were difficult. And I'll say about the religious piece. There's aspects when I look back and I do a life review and I look at my little girl self, which she is alive and well, and she walks with me daily. And is integrated and knows that I'm the one that protects her, that there's nothing in the way that I was raised as a child or what I've lived in 49 years of being Earthside that I cannot face, and that I'm safe in my own being and body. And what ones also experience as abandonment, I will say even for myself, even my connection with my birth parents, but I'll say specifically with my birth mother. I have not, there's different terms that adoptees use and say in reunion or different things. I never had a desire to physically meet my birth mother because I had a clear regression pretty early on. But I remember her holding me in the hospital. I remember her telepathic messages. I remember the feeling that I had and the connection that I had to her, that I didn't feel abandoned. And I will say this to say too, that she is also, her energetic signature, her soul signature is much like mine in the sense of her gifts and her being, and also her knowing what a sacred contract is. So even between my birth mother and my birth father, but I'll say more so with my birth mother, there's so many things that she transmitted to me while I was in her womb, and how she connected with me, and that I felt really loved. So even being given up, which again, every therapist will say that's an imprint, and at the same time, when I went from the hospital into foster care, the woman who I remember, because I do past life regressions, and there's different things in those ways that you have access. You have access to all of these things, right? It doesn't have to be an incomplete story. But even my foster care mother was such a sweet, lovey energy. And for me, in my own lived life experience and kind of entry, me being in foster care for 3 months, and the woman that was my caretaker until I was adopted, was like a saving grace. It was a calm before the storm. It was a peace. Like even my nervous system, even now when I recall and I can bring my energy back to the time with my foster mother, her energy and her nervous system was so calm, so peaceful. So even that, there are people along the journey that are literally meant to show up and to serve and to be just for that specific period of time, right? And so for me then going into my adoptive family's home, that was the initiation. I knew immediately in the sense of my own being, nervous system, body, all of that. My mother who adopted me, her nervous system, and continues to this day, is extremely dysregulated. A lot of fear, a lot of trauma in her childhood, a lot of abuse, verbal, physical, just a lot of, and I would say like programming within her family lineage that was not mine. Yeah. So again, I'm huge on the sense of, even when I'm working with clients, of like, how do you feel? I don't care what it looks like or what it sounds like. What do you feel? What does your nervous system feel when you're around this person? Or what is, so for me, coming into my home that I was to be raised in was not so beautiful, and it did not feel good, but I do see it as an initiation and a part of the contract. And so again, I will also say to that, there's aspects that I do have full recollection, even prior, if I check into the lineage, even with the family that I was adopted into, my mom in particular, before this lifetime, I've had 2 lifetimes with her. And so with that understanding and with some of those details, as I grew, I also understood some of the weaving and why it was a portal, so to speak, for me to kind of grow and to be a living, embodied example of that. Your life and what you were placed into, or even if it's a cage in some ways, it cannot define you. You're not limited to it. And because my experience is also such that I have lived in many different lands, cultures, and countries, and in my own experience as well of being a mother and world schooling and having so many different experiences in those ways, I see that it was a part of my foundation. Right? It was a part of the life that I was called here to live. So in that, I will say, and this is probably a little bit for some of the adoptive parents as well. If there is such a strong energy of like savior complex with adoption, without it being connected to like a child is coming into your life, there is a sacred contract, first of all. But if you do not see it as a reciprocal energy, if there is like a heavy hand with religion, to the extent that you see yourself as the one who is saving this child, right? Versus seeing what the child is coming here to teach you and actually having an alive relationship in those ways, you will walk your way on your own doing into estrangement, and it will be a really big heartbreak for you, right? I said what I said, and I would say it again. Yeah. And I say that because I also do work with ones who that is a part of the reality. And then even in my own experience, at certain points in my life, estrangement with my adoptive mother was a part of the plan. It was what allowed me the space, grace, and freedom to step back and to actually feel all of the things and to heal in a deeper way with therapy, with so many other things, in ways that it allowed me to integrate in the safety of my being without having to take care of her feelings and projections and all of that. And I say that to say that there are many, 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 many adults who have been adopted and have these different nuances and things connected to their origin story that they don't even realize. The parents themselves, they're so fixated on the savior complex and the story that they want to tell, that they totally overshadow that their child can have a totally different embodied and lived experience. And so for ones, and especially in the ones that find their way to me, though, I will say, this is where, again, I'm not talking shit, I'm just being totally real. It can save you a lot of time and energy if on an ego level, you can check it at the door and literally bring yourself in a place of humility and know that you're going to have a specific experience and your child is going to have a specific experience, and all are allowed, and if there is a genuine, heartfelt intention to want to connect and to especially if you're also not having and adopting children to satisfy just an egoic need, it's important, right? And I've heard it. I've heard one say that it's like, well, and after all I've done, and here's this, and then they literally act so dumbfounded as to why their adopted children have issues or have a different lived experience, which reminds me, and it shows all of us that it's like, if you are not connecting in truth, and if it's not a safe space for them to speak to you openly about what's going on, and especially if the child is of a different ethnic background, even if there is a whitewashing that has happened in the sense of like, okay, but here my child is from Korea, or this child is from here, but you're gonna indoctrinate them and they're gonna be just conditioned and then raised in this way. I am here to say that from ever since I can remember, I was always connected. I saw spirits. I had ancestral lineages, and ones that were a part of my A-team. When I say A-team, I mean my angels, ancestors, and ascending allies from the very beginning. It's a part of my lineage. It is a part of my bloodline, and it is as real as anything else, right? So again, it's not my concern for ones that it's like, if you don't see it, or you don't have that ability. And so in my case, my sight and my abilities, all of that was completely scary to my mother, the one who raised me. And I speak about my mother a lot in the sense that in our younger years, it was predominantly, I like to say that she was married, but she was a single mother married, because my dad worked a lot. So as far as religion and all the day-to-day stuff, it's like we were with her, and her energetic frequency and all of the things connected to her were a totally different operating system. I think that's the best way to say it. A totally different operating system. And I even now, like fast forward to even this now, in these, now moments, she's 83, I'm 49. We've navigated so many different things over the years, had so many uncomfortable conversations and different things we've navigated, I think, beautifully, right? So this isn't even a story of like just kind of airing dirty laundry, but it's to say that everything that I was coming in to the family that I was raised in, and that was a part of my lineage, it was always there, and it couldn't be beaten out of me. It couldn't be indoctrinated, out of me, in the sense of, because that's one of the things I think in the Christian religion, or, whatever that she is, there was such fear, because even I remember being 5 years old, and I remember one particular instance where she would lose control and lose her patience and temper a lot. She was not, and I said to her directly, I said, you were a horrible parent of small children. And even just in general, her way of being as far as outside of her operating system and what should be. And this is where, and since I've also lived in Germany as well, I can see what is the cultural imprint, right? You can see how people are raised. You can see how well they're loved. You can see how they're treated. But I remember being probably about five years old, and there was one instance, I probably broke something or did something, and she freaked out. And I remember as she was hitting me, right, which even for her, she would claim that, I don't remember that. There's a lot that there is a selective not remembering, right, because it's very convenient. But it's also something that I remember looking at her. I remember looking into her eyes. And it was the first time I saw who was connected to her. So it was her father. It was his lineage. And I saw an instance where she was being beaten by her father. And I remember as she was hitting me and yelling, I remember I looked at her and I said, "I'm sorry that your father," and I said the specific thing that she did. It was something like that he beat, because the punishment didn't fit the crime. And so that was also kind of in different things, whether it was impatience or yelling or different things in how I was raised. It didn't match, right? A child being a child or dropping something or whatever. The punishment did not fit the crime. And it's not even a crime. It's just children being children and you having an extremely dysregulated nervous system that you're not in command. And I remember seeing that. I remember feeling like she's not even in control of her being and her body. And it made me actually feel sad, because I think even in myself, there was a part of me that could kind of dissociate. But when I said, "I'm sorry that your father, blah, blah, blah," and I described exactly something, and there was her face, and she's already white, but she turned completely white. And she was like, "How do you know that? You can't know that." And to me, there were so many different things that I could it was like being able to read. You know, you can say you walk into a room, you can read a room, or you can read people. And even if you're wearing a mask, for the children that are clairvoyant and psychic and connected in the ways that they are, by the time you're figuring out what mask you're going to put on, they have already seen your real face, right? And so my energy and my frequency, even at 4, even at 5, was extremely off-putting to my mother's operating system. So eventually I had to kind of navigate in different ways. And then when we even brought it to the religion, I remember saying, I was probably about 6 years old. And I remember saying, "This doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not going to be this religion. I'm not going anymore." Because we had to go like 3 days a week and go knock on people's doors and, whatever. And I kind of isolate my mom in that, because my father, who adopted us as well, he was never of that religion. So in so many ways, and I've recorded a piece about him in the sense of dreams from my father, because we had a totally different dynamic in dance in our relationship. And he was much more playful and fun and would shield me a lot. You know, there was also different times it's like I would wait for him to come home because I broke something, and I would hide it under something. And then the second he came in the door, I'd be like, "Dad, I broke this, blah, blah, blah." And, here's this little girl who's afraid to say I broke something. And then he would cover for me. He'd say, "Don't worry about it. I'll tell your mother I did it," blah, blah, blah. So again, a different aspect of enabling and whatever. It was just the dance. But I remember saying to my mother, as far as the religion was concerned, I said, "It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't resonate." And I probably didn't use that word at that age, but I remember being probably about 6 years old. I said, "I'm not going anymore." There was an aspect of my sovereignty that I was well aware of from a very young age, which again, for certain beings that are so threatened and have deep wounds and insecurity in their own being, a child that comes into your family and comes into your life, that comes knowing that they are connected to God, that they are a child of God, that there is no, I didn't have an inferiority complex. I didn't see myself as less than. Those things and some of that conditioning and some of those programs, like I said, it was not my operating system. And so the being that I was coming into the family that was, ordained to raise me. And I say that intentionally. And that's why I want to say also sacred contracts. There was no mistake. There's no taking it back and saying, oh, if only, my birth mother would have raised me. In my world and in my reality and from the perspective that I see things, all was as it was. It was a part of the portal that I was meant to walk through. There was things that I was collapsing, timelines that I was collapsing on behalf of not only my bloodline, my birth family, but there was also things that I took on to kind of clear within my adoptive family as well. But I will say time served, and it's all... It's good. I would say as an assignment goes, I'm happy that I don't have to go back in those ways. I'm happy with the way that I've learned to step into my being and my power. I'm happy with how I chose to raise my son, my biological son. All of the things that served as the fuel for and the fires of transformation, I totally acknowledge, and I can stand and look myself in my own eyes and see exactly who I am and where I came from and what it's about. And there's a freedom, there's a lightness in it. And I think I'm sharing some of these pieces as well. Because for ones that are in different stages of the process, right? Because there are ones, and I've worked with them. Ones who are in their 40s and in their 50s who literally are still coming to terms with horrible realities when it comes, whether it's in foster care or, and again, even beyond foster care. There's ones who just in general, their biological parents were their abusers in different ways, or especially when it comes to multiracial or intercountry adoption. I don't know all the lingo and stuff, but like being then placed with families who have racist ancestry and horrible things in their closet, right? And that they're still working through. It's not my place to speak to how anybody heals and the time that it takes and all of that. But I've been told that sharing pieces of my story in this way is also to serve the ones and to know that it's possible. That even in the sense of how... the joy, like this is where I would say when I think of my upbringing or what is the word? When I think of my upbringing, when I think of schooling, the most freedom that I experienced was when I moved, when I moved out and I had the space to be in my own frequency, which is also for me huge. People who come into my field and come into not only my own energetic field, so this is where if I'm traveling and whatever it is, that is our home. Our energetic frequency and our soul signature, that is our home. That is our being, and we carry it with us. It's what it is. But in my physical home, in the place where I lay my head and I rest, you can come into the field and into my home and feel my signature. You can feel it's an extension of who I am. And so for me, the most growth and healing and holding happened when I moved from my parents' house. I think I was 19. 19, and I moved about a half an hour away and kind of found my way in the sense of, my work as a massage therapist, working in different realms, prenatal massage, all of, those things, but really focused also on healing and holding. So that was where it was my business partner who I remember she was working on me. We traded, worked on each other. That was a part of our business as well, restoring balance. So I was not only working and serving other people through body work and cranial sacral therapy and those things, but it was key in my own healing that those were things that I was receiving as well. And I remember my business partner at the time saying to me, she's like, Amber, she's like, there's so much that is stuck here in your body that I think you stepped up and out of. So that, to me, the safety to go into the story and the healing and the embodied stuff and to remove it from my cells, began a huge, beautiful, amazing journey of holing. And I still, to this day, I can't speak enough about ones who work with the physical body and healing in that way, because there's a limit. The psychotherapy and all of that, that's so valuable. It's amazing, and it's a part of it, right? To connect some of those dots. But for myself, it was the path that led me to some of the other realms, being able to connect some of the other, the dots in the way of my own bloodline and my lineage. And it took me to trance, and to working with different indigenous healers, and ones that reminded me of the wisdom and the medicine that I carry. And that as much as that was not a part of my childhood, I was completely removed from my lineage and family in those ways. But the lineage and the stuff that works through me and the ancestors that walk with me never left. And so for me, there's a beauty in being able to connect, and the way that I get to work with ones too, that you're never separated. There is always an ability to reconnect, and call back those lost pieces of self. And even for ones that choose not to connect with their birth families. So I will say for myself, in particular, it was not a huge calling. I didn't feel, and I think that's probably, I just touched on it very briefly, but about like with my birth mother, that I didn't feel this abandonment in a way. I felt her love. I felt like I understood also the dynamic when I flash on the screen of the consciousness of what was going on with my birth mother and my birth father, and the fact of their relationship and her not having the support. Because again, in 1976, even as far as interracial dating and relationships in the families, there was not cohesiveness. She did not have the support. And there was different aspects for even my birth father, and him being an immigrant in the ways that he was, that there was so many other dynamics it was not the space that was meant to be held for me. Right? So I'm at complete peace with that. But in my life, I didn't have this yearning, like, or this fantasy. You know, sometimes people call it like there's this limerence where you overlay and you project onto like, and you have like this fantasy picture of who and what your parents are. I didn't feel that confusion. I also felt there was a gift, and even in the family that I was raised in, because I didn't look like any of them, and because I was in just being me, I felt that it was acceptable for me to be all of who I am. And I have heard also from some of my guides and A-team in that way, that was a part of my path. That was a part of like, okay, we want you to know this. Even as I've lived and traveled in different places, I've been in different lands and cultures where I'm not from there. And yet I show up authentically in any land, any space, any place, and I bring 100% of who I am with respect to the guardians of the land, with respect to the cultures and places that I'm going to, but I do not alter myself and try to shapeshift into be anybody other than myself. There is an unapologetic freedom, joy, sovereignty, as well as a calling in ways that everywhere I was called to follow in my path, in my journeys and traveling and with birthing and with the ones that I've connected to all over the world, it was always ordained. It was always a part of. I would have dreams and I would literally see the faces and energies of people before I met them, right? And the same would happen for them. Different healers and sangomas and midwives and ones, they were also having visions and dreams. And then we would literally, whether it was South Africa or Ghana or Ethiopia, which for me, again, I will say that part of my healing and holing as an adopted kid was to literally spend my pregnancy in the lands that contained my blood, right? So Ethiopia was huge. And then also throughout my journey, that was part of like my vision quest as well, and spent time in Portugal and France as well. But I also knew that was part of how I could recall, especially when you step on the land. So this is another key piece, I think, for adoptees as well. Sometimes there's this energy where you feel this calling to connect with certain aspects of your bloodline and lineage. So whether it's getting on a plane and going to that particular country, or this is where too you can actually travel to those places within your being. I won't go into that. That's probably too much information for ones. But there's ways to do that and to reconnect those pieces without necessarily, because there's been a lot of stories too where there's such heartbreak in there's like a limerence or a fantasy or this projection of like, oh, and this is what it'll be like when I meet my birth mother and father. And there can be some beautiful stories connected to that, which is fantastic. But a lot of ones, there's so much energy connected to it. And without seeing the actual human beings in the sense of why they made the decisions that they made, where does it fit in the bigger picture of the story? Yeah. There's so much to it, and nobody's story is the same. And there's, again, I can only speak to, for, and from the one that I am. But I know from my own personal experience exactly how I came into the world and how I was raised, and being the only person of color for many, many, many years, and always seeing that it's like I didn't see my face. I didn't see my face until I went to Ethiopia. And for me, it was Ethiopia. I literally felt this homecoming in a way. It was actually a strange experience. I will say there was a homecoming, and there was things that I received in the sense of energetics in the land. Still to this day, Ethiopian food is my favorite to cook, to eat. It works really beautifully in my body. The second closest Indian food. But there was so much that I was able to recall, and I was pregnant with my son at the time. And it was powerful. And at the same time, there was a lot that you can see that has happened within even that. There can be this false kind of where you have this fantasy, but then you see actually what is happening in certain places as well, that there is the beauty and the beast, and that is everywhere. And so this is one of the things that I tried to work with ones too, that there can be this fantasy aspect. And then when you're actually met with what the reality is, whether it's the real story, the real story between the why or the behind your parents giving you up for adoption, or what the circumstances were. There can also be not just the displacement of like, okay, here I'm being raised by a completely different culture and different land, and here's this orphan energy. But then you can still feel that when you're in a place and you're like, well, do I fit here either? Because also in my own being, there is a progression in my own lineage and my bloodline that I have walked through for ones that were never meant to walk and to go to the places that I have gone in my own bloodline. And I fully acknowledge that. I also acknowledge within my own bloodline, as much as there is aspects of this freedom and sovereignty, and I very quick to claim that side of my being. It's probably also why I am the way that I am. I don't care who you are. I don't care what it is. I don't feel inferior to anyone. And I don't feel myself above anyone either. I literally see myself as a divine, sovereign, free being. And any soul that I interact with, I have the ability to see in their own being, whether or not they live it and accept it as their truth, I see them as the soul that they are in their divine, sovereign, free being. So for me, it isn't even arrogance. It's just what is, right? It's not wishful thinking. It's not and again, I will say, as a child and growing up in a particularly, by my German mother and her lineage, there's some strong energies, especially by her father, that was deeply insecure, racist, mean, and entitled in feeling that he is better than, and he's the pure, like the bloodline in those ways, right? So I will say, even for my mother, a little shout out in those ways. We've joked about this. I said, you even stepped out. He said, you became the black sheep in your own family by even choosing to adopt a girl outside of the family line. Because even that, I remember my father, I think I'm skipping around here, but I remember my father coming to meet me for breakfast one day before he came in to get a massage. And I remember hearing stories like in my 20s, like things that I had never heard about, right? This is also the beauty of, at different stages and different ages, being able to meet your children. I think this applies to adopted or not. This even applies to my 20-year-old son, that the beauty of being able to have conversations and to be able to see it from a different view, right? Especially when you've grown and you're not a little kid needing to be soothed. You can handle the full details in those ways. And I remember my dad, my father who raised me, I remember him saying how it was just such a big fight. It was like a big thing that I was even being adopted. And even, I will say, my brother, because he wasn't of the bloodline. There was something really strong in my mother's German lineage that was, superior race, all of that kind of stuff. And so I remember that eventually there was probably enough arguments and enough fights that happened, especially between my dad. My dad was somebody, the father who raised me, he was somebody who was not about injustice in any way. And so even my mother's father, in ways that he was blatantly disrespectful to her, to anyone around him. He was also an alcoholic and had different, he was just kind of a piece of work. Who's it? There's an author who says if people wanted you to speak better about them, they should have behaved better. Who said that? Anne Lamott, I think. If people wanted you to speak better about them or speak kindly about them, they should have behaved better. So I have no issues in speaking in those ways. And even in my conversation with my mom, she fully acknowledges it as well, that the lineage that she came from and her bloodline, there's not a lot of beauty, but my father was one who, whether we were there for whatever, dinner or something, I always remember there being a fight, and it was because my dad would stand up and say, "You are not to talk to my wife that way," which I admire, and I probably get some of that from him. There's an aspect of like, if you don't have the ability to speak, if something is happening and you're witnessing it, and that to me I think goes for men or women, but in the sense of even their dynamic and relationship, that was always something. And I do remember that. I will speak to that even about my father, is that even with him being, this white face energy and his being, he made it a point to make sure that I knew that I was loved, and that I, like, in his being and even the ancestors that were surrounding him, I never felt any issues with race. It was only with my German mother, because again, like I said, even the story that I recounted of being young, it's like I could see what ancestors, even when my mom would speak or she would say something, the tone that she used, I think I'll do a separate piece just connected to relate to race if I feel like it. This is where too, like I said, sometimes I'm just not even in the mood. There's so many other conversations and ones that I get to work with and walk with in my work that it takes up a significant amount of time and energy, and I don't necessarily feel the need to rehash or like in my own personal stuff. But again, I promised that I would do it. And I am trying to be a little bit better in that, in the sense that I'm listening and I'm hearing that it's like, Amber, it's not even about you. There are people that could benefit from hearing some of these stories. But I will say for my father, he always, I didn't feel that in his energetic frequency. I felt a very balanced energy, and I didn't feel racism in his being. It was only my mother's line. And I'll say even to this day, this was after his death, which again, I will say my mother and I have had to walk through different aspects, and literally the balance of power that happens. And this is where I will say the elephants in the room. The being that I am is also a truth teller. So I am not one to just sit and not say anything and kind of smile and something. Maybe I did it through school, or I will even say, even as far as the religion and school and different things, the only time that I was really inauthentic and kind of living a double life was probably when I was in high school, because I knew the level of emotional and kind of a manipulation with my mom was the fact that I wasn't disrespectful to the point where even when I said this religion isn't for me, I don't want to do this, and this was at 6, it was clear that until you're 18, you have no choice. This is your reality. And because I wasn't rebellious to the point where I was just being like, forget you, I learned, and I still say this I've said this to my son, and we've lived this in many places. I said, know your house. Know your house. So whether it's a land or your physical home, know the rules of the land, know your house. And so for me, because I knew that this is what was required of me, was to go to church 3 times a week, and here's this, and it's like go through all of those motions, even though I knew it wasn't in my heart and soul, I did it. And then had my, normal, I would say, well, because I call it normal. I don't have any, that's the other thing, is I don't have shame in my being, which is also a part of wholeness and sovereignty as well. Anything as you grow and evolve and learn in different ways, I don't have an aspect of my being that condemns the parts of me that was, I was growing and I did this, or, look at, I lied. I said I was going to with another girl from the church to blah, blah, blah. And I went to a party with worldly kids, blah, blah, blah. I was a kid, and I was certainly living and doing what I did because it was not okay to tell the truth. Know your house this is the reality. And the consequence for me in the house that I was raised is that my mother would ignore me. Because so again, I won't even emphasize like the like physical aspects. There was the impatience in certain things as a child, but more so it was emotional withholding of love or ignoring, like silent treatment. So if you don't do what is expected, there's a withhold of love and energy in that way. And so I learned that's part of knowing the house. So the day that I turned 18, I said, okay, time served, done. Never going back. And so for me, even as far as the religion that I was raised, I don't even have any guilt or like, oh, I left and I feel bad or something, because all of what runs through my veins and my being is not like, even I absolutely love the one that is Yeshua ben Joseph. I acknowledge him as one being of many beings, many beings on this planet who came with a specific Christed energy, which is a title, which is an energy, which is a frequency. That level of consciousness and Christedness and unconditional love, all of that. There are also other beings in different lands, different cultures, different whatever, that still carry that same Christed Shiva, Buddhic, and come on, we can't even begin to speak of the different beings connected to African spirituality and some of there's just so many. There's so many. So this is where too, I see it all under the realm of the power of one source, one God, one consciousness in the heart of love. To me, it's what I live. It's what is my path. It's why I'm able to live and connect with anybody. Well, I will say on a level of frequency, I wouldn't say anybody, because this is also very real too, that resonance will attract the ones that you're meant to connect with. But because I do have a deep reverence and respect for people's personal relationships with the divine, right? It's none of anybody else's business. There are ones who literally, their practice, their way of being, and they can be Muslim, they can be, different ones. And I see it in their way that they live. Like those teachings and that embodiment should absolutely come out just in their practice and their daily connection and communion with the divine, whether it's praying 5 times a day or different rituals or different things. That's their own relationship, and it is none of my business, right? But I do know that for me, probably being raised the way that I was, there was a lot that I saw that was completely hypocritical. And when I speak of a mask, when I speak of, there were things that it's like, okay, so here's the face that you show to the world, but this is what's happening in the home. This is how this is what you want people to see. And this is how you actually speak to your children. Or this is what, that dynamic is. I have a really, I do not have a huge tolerance for ones that are just kind of fronting in different ways. And again, being that I am who I am, those masks fall pretty quickly. And then, so that's why I speak to even about resonance. If ones are coming with layers and masks in different ways, they won't even be able to stand the frequency that I bring for any extended period of time. So in many ways, it's beautiful protection. It's beautiful. And then it opens up in the sense of energetically, the ones that you are in alignment with, when there's a frequential resonance It is beautiful, and it exists all over the globe. So I will say even that, the piece about religion, for the ones that literally it's like this is only, you only associate with these people, then they do not really know what unity consciousness is, and that there is a beauty in diversity. Although at the same time, I am all for ones that you will choose. If your values are such that there are certain things, I said this to a friend of mine recently who's Muslim. We joke about being the monk and the priestess, right? But I remember saying to him, I said, I think it's important for you to really, for your next partner, that she needs to be Muslim. He kept trying to make do with somebody who was didn't have the same value and values and in that, especially with the religion. And for him, it's a huge piece and important for him. I think it's important. So I do think there's something to that as well, that birds of a feather, right? Or, there's a resonance when people choose that. So I don't have any problem with ones choosing to practice however they practice, to worship in the ways that they do, especially if there's no harm. But I have noticed in the ones that I walk with and work with too, some of the ones who are so beautifully able to present to the outside world these, whether it's under the blanket of religion, and then having completely different stories going on personally. I think it does a huge disservice to the religion itself, because what is the saying? You will know, what is it? You will know the seed by its fruit. Something to that effect. It's like you just know it. You can just feel it. And so to me, for ones that are out of integrity or out of alignment with the truth that they're speaking, and this also goes when it comes down to war and humanity and different things, you cannot claim it. You cannot claim your religion in any way, shape, or form if you are in any way saying that there is any human being that deserves to die because your God is sanctioning one over the other. It just doesn't happen. That's not even in alignment with the law and power of one, right? So again, I won't get on my soapbox there. Trying to think what would be a good piece to share. I will say, as I've gotten older, the dynamic with... No, let me go here. This is a piece of estrangement, because I was sharing this with a client recently who is going through a period of estrangement, which again, some of the ways and most of the stories that I share, I do it individually. It's not like all of my story comes out in whatever. There's specific pieces that if I'm called to share, I understand that there are lineages and there's things that come through in sharing of the story, right? It's part of my bloodline as well, oral tradition. That's why I don't write. I have no interest in writing. But there are specific pieces that serve, and I think part of why I'm being called to share as well, that some people are in the midst of the estrangement, and it's a really difficult thing, but you realize, and I'm saying for myself, that maybe a year and a half that I was, it was more my mom, that I was estranged from, because there were specific things that in her upbringing, and you hear me say like operating system, I literally mean that, having different operating systems, there's certain things that just don't jive. And I remember one of the times I think I was going to Chicago for a craniosacral, I was first learning craniosacral therapy, and I had my own house, and my house was 5 minutes from my office, and where my parents lived was probably about 35-40 minutes away. And I remember my mom calling and saying, your dad and I are going to go to the cottage, right? They were driving to another property, something that they had 17 hours away, and they had dogs. And she said, I need you to come tomorrow. We'll be gone for a week. And it was the first time. I was probably 20, I don't know, early 20s. And I said, I need you to ask. I said, I have something that I've committed to, right? A workshop I can't come tomorrow, right? But it was the hierarchy or the energy of, well, I'm the parent and I don't care. This is what we're doing. And it wasn't an emergency. It was just a trip that they were doing. It was just that the card that is played of, because I said so, do it. And so for me, what facilitated or instigated the estrangement was I said, I can't. I have a commitment and I'm not going to cancel the workshop. I said, I will happily do it, but you need to give me a heads up and we can plan it in the sense. And even with my work, because of the distance in those ways, and they're not my dogs, right? And staying at their house, like whatever. It was like a huge thing. It was the first time I was like, I can't. We need to grow our relationship into the next chapter of adults. It is not just the hierarchy, like because you're blah, 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 which again speaks everything to who I am in my being. I had someone ask me that recently. They're like, well, how did you do it? Something, well, how did your parents and something? I said, they didn't really have a choice, because in order to continue to have a relationship with me, we need to actually evolve. We need to be able to have different conversations. We need to bring it to a different level. And again, it takes two people to do that. And so for me, as much as I was raised in the ways of like, who do you think you are? Right? It was the first time where I think they canceled it and they didn't go, right? Which it wasn't canceling. They didn't even, it was driving. It was, whatever. But there was an expectation that I would drop everything, cancel what I had, or not even a consideration. And so even for myself, even if I look at it now, I never speak to my son that way. I always, even when he was young, I wasn't overly trying to be his buddy and friend, but I extended the same courtesy and respect that I expected for him to show to me. So there wasn't anyways, that was the first time. It was the beginning of our estrangement, because then even after that, there was all this energy of, who do you think you are and something. And then the silent treatment, especially when you don't live there, it's like, it was kind of a nice gift. I remember going over there on a Sunday. I think there was a certain point where I would go over there just once a week to their house. Because my mom would never come to my house. That was also totally outside of her comfort zone. And I say to people too, be careful of people who do not want you to leave their familiar and comfort zone, which again, props to my father, because he was, in so many ways, he was happy to, come meet me for breakfast, or we would go and do things. So I had a totally different dynamic and relationship with my dad. But I remember going over to my mother's house on a Sunday, and her nature as well is very critical in her own being, right? So this is where, again, where I am, fast forward to this now moment, I see it for what it is. I see the little girl in her who was extremely wounded, who was extremely verbally and physically abused. So this is where I will even say for myself, what my mother experienced and what I experienced was like a total fraction of that, right? I would say it was more the religious aspects that were extremely confining to my spirit, as well as the energetic frequency of love, like what I know and I experience in ways that I love myself and my own being and my body, and an acceptance of my being and body, right? When I go to my own mirror, I don't pick myself apart, which again took a lot of work. That was a huge part of my 20s, well before motherhood, that was the work of kind of deprogramming some of those things that I was raised with. But I will say it wasn't that difficult, because once I was out of her frequency and out of their home, I just blossomed. And I literally, the ones that my soul gravitated towards, and whether it was my friends, and I still say to this day, soul family and friends, and the ones that I have met along the journey that have become literally my tribe, and shown love in ways that I'm like, oh yes, that's what it's supposed to feel like. I feel grateful for, right? But I will say that the transition of like making like where you you stand for yourself, you stand up and you say, I think it was I remember this, I'm going to share this. It was a Sunday that I came over, and my mom's criticism, she saw me. I think I just had cut my hair. This was well before my priestess initiation and having my head shaved, but it was a drastic cut from having long hair to then short, styled, I thought it was cute and beautiful, and I liked it, but it was a huge change. And the first thing she said was, I hate it. How long will it take to grow back? And I remember I thought to myself, I said, all week, I like my life. I like my work. I like the people that are part of my friends and family. I said, I come to your house. I drive here every week. I come to your house. Within 5 minutes, you criticize, and literally with your intention and jealousy and all of these different aspects, you have the ability to make me feel like shit. But now I will say, this is also the reality, until you actually grow into the place as well, where you learn that it's like people don't have the power to make you feel any kind of way. I was still healing and growing, but part of the estrangement that was important for us was me saying, no, I'm not doing this. And I remember, her aspect saying, her being saying, well, you're just too sensitive and blah, blah, blah. I said, you know what? I'm not coming over anymore. I'm done. And so there was that was all kind of this little cascading effect that started, whereas I was stepping out of, I may have been raised in this family, and I understand, especially, this side of especially if one's carry the savior complex of we saved you from, whatever. All of those stories were starting to kind of shed in ways that it's I also see in my own being the gift and blessing that I am. And it was feeling unbalanced. It was me not supporting her narrative anymore. And so by me stepping into my own empowerment and kind of calling my power back in ways and healing, and again having beautiful souls that and relationships, I will say also too, the relationships and ones that I have danced with in those ways were huge balms and healing to my being, and saying how you were raised and all of that, that's not how love is. That's not what it looks like. And so I'm pretty blessed that in my life that has been the past. So I wasn't a prisoner of my upbringing, right? And so that probably year and a half, was just this unspoken, just separation. My dad would still come and connect. And then this is where too, even for him and I, we had conversations about things. And I said, this is an opportunity for us as well. We can bring it forward. So let's have conversations as an adult. I will honor and respect my upbringing. I show love and gratitude in the ways that I do. But I'm not indebted, right? So this is where, again, for ones that are claiming a narrative and expecting the children that you chose to adopt. And so in that, there is no debt. which again, I still say that that's part of my bloodline and lineage, that comes through of like, know who you are. You look in the mirror. It isn't coming from outside of you. It isn't coming from beings and they have to pump you up and say all this. If you cannot go to your own mirror and learn to cultivate that relationship with yourself, with your cells, and it is a process, and it's I don't know, I think it's probably the most important relationship, and then all of the other relationships are just an added bonus, because it becomes also a beautiful extension and reflection, and a place to practice loving and being loved well. I love it. But there's a saying that says you get to choose how long you are haunted by what has haunted you. I think I totally messed that up. But you get to decide. And so this is where, for me, there was that period of estrangement in my mid-20s with my mom was really important, and I wouldn't change it. And it was a fantastic year. I remember I grew exponentially in so many different, expanded in my being and ways, especially because I wasn't having to contain it in any way. I was only between my work and then also too, my home space. It's what even my son said recently. He's like, it feels good to be in your space again, because we don't live in the same state. Or oftentimes even country. But it is a reflection of me. My home, for me, is sanctuary. And because I really take care to make sure that my home and my space, or if it's an office, I don't have a brick and mortar office anymore. But even that, it's a frequency and energetic field that you can feel before you even walk in. And it's not only for my clients, it is first and foremost for myself. It is how I choose to be in the space, which is why there is always, whether it's music or even now, I specifically chose nature sounds, because if there's a long amount of talking, I'm not planning on re-recording this. Not even sure that I will listen to it before I upload. Anyways, what other pieces do I want to speak about my origin story? I think I will, and this is again just a tribute to some of my soul brothers and sisters and ones who are on the path of holding and healing from their origin stories, their childhood upbringing. It's possible. It's possible. And the reason I said that you get to decide how long you suffer in, I would say either silence or also just, it's like sometimes even carrying it as a cross to bear. My favorite saying, and I've said this even with my mother, my adoptive mother, which I don't say, we don't even talk like that, right? This is also, I will say this is a shout out to also the ones who, because there's also a lot of beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stories of adoption. And this is where it makes me also very, very excited for the ones that I get to work with who are making peace with also their own lineages in different ways. And if they have chosen to adopt a child, especially outside of their own ethnic background, culture, in those ways, I'm meeting ones who are really open to doing it differently. So I do think there are a certain number of beings who were kind of pioneering in different aspects, and it was probably just part of what was the path, right? But I will say for myself that because my frequency and my core imprint is, it's love to begin with, but it's joy. And I've consistently, in different lands that I've gone to, different languages and different ones, literally in South Africa, it's Vuyo, which is of course the name. But there's different aspects of like who I am, and it is joy, right? This is also what I will say with, the mother who raised me. The frequency of celebration and joy was not woven into her childhood and experience. And so in it, and then you layer on the layers of dogma and religion and sin and guilt and shame and all of that stuff. And then here comes this little girl who's like, hey, what's going on here? I'm not feeling the joy. I'm not feeling the love. I'm not feeling joy. Let's do something about that. I have an infectious ability to lift energy and transmute. This goes beyond the work that I do in the realms of healing arts and channeling, but it's just part of my coding. It's part of my frequency. And so at 49 years old, the reason I celebrate and I live the way that I do is because it's my birthright. It's because it's who I am, which is why I think it even took me as long to even share some of these pieces of the story, which even too, I don't know that I even recounted huge pieces, because it's just not, to me, it's not even that interesting. But yet the ones that I do work with, I have the structural aspects of how I operate. I have specific days that I work with ones, and then I have a significant amount of time that is just free and play and cooking and the things that I enjoy, because I realized that one of the things that I had kind of taken on very young is in my ability to like see what's going on, to be able to read rooms, to be able to psychically connect in different ways, and then raise the frequency of any space that I am in. It's an automatic. I realized for myself that was not a cross to bear, even when it comes to lineage and patterns, and you know how sometimes too it's like, well, ancestral, you have to clear the karma and something. Sometimes the ones that I'm working with, I'm like, do you want to do that? You are not obligated to clear any patterns and lineages. So if you do not want to carry that, you can take the baggage and set it down, and you can step into the fullness of your being and your life and see what you're here to do. And so I knew, because joy is such a deep part of my being and my encoding, I don't consume myself with constant drama and the retelling. Although this is where I'll say there are ones that I've walked with and connected to the work that I do, that there's sex trafficking, abuse. There's so many different things that you would have no fathomable way of saying, wow, how are people actually living and surviving and thriving through these things? And it's because I've walked with ones and I've seen it, that there is a level of holding and healing and ability to come out of being a complete, like your homeland decimated by genocidal wars and things that are going on in so many different ways, and then still coming out on another aspect and saying, but that's not all my life is. And seeing and hearing these stories of resilience and being able to walk with ones through different things, it's profound, it's powerful, and yet I have a limit to how much time I spend in those spaces. This is where there's like I was saying this to a client recently. It's like I have my schedule and the ways that I work, and then there's a significant, I actually have 3 days a week that I'm on and channeling and working in those ways and in those realms. And then there's 4 days that I focus in other ways. And some of the tools that have served my own process of coming home have been connected to things connected to my bloodline. So I still facilitate trance dance, where you have access on a multi-dimensional level to all spaces and time in different ways, and what is meant to come up for integration. And it's also a lot faster than the cycle looping of therapy. And I'm not dismissing that because, again, it's not my job to diagnose or to do anything in those ways. But for the ones, this is where, on a level of resonance too, I can tell the ones that are not done yet. They'll need more time in the realms of processing and speaking it, right? So that's also, it's a deep honor, and for the ones that are holding space in, whether it's psychotherapy, psychiatry, somatic body work, but I'm one that is really deeply connected to integration within the physical body. Because beyond the mind, if you separate it in those ways, there's so much that it gets stored, the issues and things in the tissues and memories. So for the lineage that I come from, we move the body. And one of the practices I will say for myself is something that I came up with through my own healing, as well as there was literally a repatterning that I did where I literally called all of my energy back from even my birth mother and my birth father. I literally called my energy back into myself, and I was not holding the frequency of any distortions that were not connected to my divine line. And when I say my divine line, I mean my direct source connection to my mother, father, God. Period. And in doing that, I realized that it's like, there's a lightness of being that happens, and you realize there's much more play. There's much more joy. There's like, it's, and it isn't a bypassing. It's, I don't know, it's just been a part of my path. And so again, when I connect with different ones, and whether there's different pieces of the story that I share, or a specific way of accessing the places where you can go direct, like you just go direct to what is like, where is the distortion? Here it is. Okay. Let's transmute that. And especially for ones who are willing, can be a beautiful life, regardless of what the origin story, the orphan, I think it even took me a while to say that. It's like, well, so I was technically orphaned, but I will say in my reality as well, I was never, ever, 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 ever abandoned by my mother, father, God. And as an absolute direct result of me stepping in fullness and full commitment to my path and my sojourn in the ways that I was called to do that for myself, for my son, for the next generation. I call them new grid kids. It's well worth it, and it's beautiful, and I wouldn't change it, even the things that were difficult. I'll do some separate recordings probably about human. I think I've even recorded some in the Black Forest that I haven't uploaded yet about race relations and different things. But I think the medicine that I bring and the ways that I work and walk with people too, I like the ones that I get to connect with, because I feel like in a group setting, it's not a one size fits all. Everybody's at different stages and different places in their sojourn in different ways. And so knowing that to be true, when there's ones that come and I get to work specifically, I attune specifically to what's going on in their frequency. And if there's specific things that are coming up in their bloodline, or distortions that come from the family that raised them, or foster care system, whatever. It's more direct, and I think quicker. It's interesting. Anyways, what's my point? How much time? I've been talking for about an hour and a half. I don't even know how many pieces I actually touched on with regard to my origin story. I think the big theme too that I would like to speak to a little bit is, this saying about like you want to appease your ancestors, right? There's someone who wrote a book. It's like become a good ancestor, right? This for me has been the biggest gift in being raised how I was raised, because I saw in many different ways things that were out of alignment with my nature, with my spiritual connection with the divine, and in honoring my ancestors, the ones that walk with me, who are alive and well in so many different ways. It's so much fun. I'm more interested in becoming a good ancestor. And this is also a direct result when I think of even with my son. There are so many things, even as a direct result of how I was raised. We all have the experience of being a child, and what is out of alignment, what feels good, what doesn't feel good. And so my son coming in the ways that he came as this being to bless my life, there was so much that came forth in ways that healed not only my own lineage, but also in becoming a good ancestor and acknowledging that it's like the biggest report card that you will ever receive is what your children have to say about you. So even for the ones that are really interested in like, oh, let's show this face to the world, or let's make sure we look a certain way to the outside. If the people who are closest to you, your children, your spouse, the people who you live with day to day, if their feedback in direct relationship to who you are and what you show up as every day is not a favorable one, I don't care if you pray 5 times a day and you do all of the most charitable things that look on the outside, you fucked up. You got it wrong, right? And so to me, that was my lesson in knowing that it's like there cannot be a discrepancy. I understand we are all growing and learning and imperfection and all of that. But on such a deep level, I was called to be a good ancestor, to literally, and even the things that I walked through with my own son, even things that I didn't have modeled to me, I remember saying, well, what would I have wanted? Or having the open dialogue to have conversations that, again, the report card that you get are from the relationships that you have with your children, with the next generation. Yeah, because again, to me, I'm just not so keen on people who put on appearances, but in reality are completely a different frequency. Yeah. And at the same time, I still can feel compassion for those beings in ways that's also, it's not also a beautiful aspect to live out of your own core blueprint as well, right? And there's all kinds of reasons for it, but blah, 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 blah. I think that's really all I want to say. I will end with, there's 2 pieces here. There's 2 pieces. One is by Rupi Kaur. There's a quote. It says, when I stopped searching for home within others and lifted the foundations of home within myself, I found there were no roots more intimate than those between a mind, body, and soul that have decided to become whole. That resonates and strikes such a deep chord of truth. for me and for the ones that I have met along this journey. And I'm only 49 in the sense of like, I'm probably only halfway into this lifetime. I still am one who like, I still, in so many ways, there's a level of mastery and there's things that are integrated in the ways that they are, but there's also other things that kind of are coming online in ways that I feel like a little kid who's just getting started, and it's fun. And I will say, and this is for all of the ones who are maybe happen to be in different places within their own journey, their own healing, their own holding, you'll know it as you breathe it, as you be it, as you live it, and all of the different spaces and places within your body that you experience, whether it's out of alignment and then you find yourself kind of finding your way and dancing. Even now, if you watched how I'm moving, there is a physical, literal, embodied connection to our Holy Spirit, our breath, our being, our embodiment. That is so profound, and it's worth it, and it's fun. I love getting older. I love getting older. It really is a beautiful experience. And I will say, as far as, again, going back to the adoption story, I joke even with my 83-year-old mother. Sometimes there's things that'll come out of her mouth and I'll just look at her and I'll say, not my circus, not my monkeys. And it's funny when she will actually say it. And I said, and you can say the same thing. This is where, even as far as a lot of all of who I be, this is also, maybe I should end on this note, that the ability, even her, like her and I being, and again, I don't speak of my father in this, he's no longer, he left the mortal coil about a year ago. But again, because I am psychic and connected in those ways, he's alive and well. Spirit is eternal. It's what it is. It's beautiful. Sometimes those conversations, this is another kind of plug for some of the ones who maybe if they don't come to a place of peace and closure, and maybe the estrangement doesn't end or something, even if they leave their bodies, sometimes the relationships actually get better, because they are not then limited to the consciousness that they were living and the indoctrination and all of those things, that when they actually leave their body, they have access in different ways that then they come through and they're like, I didn't see. Yeah. And that again is the beauty and gift that I bring as well to different ones, that it's like they're able to kind of make peace with some of those broken pieces, but sometimes it's not how you think that it looks, or in the time frame that you would like it to be. So everyone's got to walk that path themselves. But I will say there are times, even for my mother, she'll say, I said, and you can say the same thing about me. There's things where she literally, whether I'm in, different countries, something, and I'll pick up the phone and I'll call, and she's like, how did you know? I'm like, stop asking me that. You mean, how do I know? And she's like, oh yeah, which again, all of the things as far as the realms and my gifts as a medium and the realms that are natural to my own lineage and bloodline, for her are totally incongruent with her religion and different things, but it is what it is. There is no argument. And so I'll say, well, you can just say, not my circus, not my monkeys, right? So I say the same when she's going on about something and it's in her family, and she'll be like, I know, not your circus, not your monkeys. And the fact that we can do that and we can have those conversations, and we've learned to come to a place of a radical forgiveness, right? So this is also, maybe I'm not done yet. I will speak to this because we even spoke that even as I was my dad's hospice nurse, midwife of death. That's one of my many hats, which was an absolute pleasure. I think every child coming in should have, and if possible, to have a beautiful earthside entry. And I think for the ones leaving as well, it's another transition and birth in that way, to be able to leave beautifully. But I remember saying to my mom, that we survived it, because as different as we are on so many aspects, we learned to respect each other's being, even different things. And in those spaces, it's like, where I am, you are not. And where you are, I am not. And we can do this if we respect that. But there was no hierarchy. There was definitely some things that we purged. So I think even that happens as well. Life and situations will bring it. So you can bring it up. And when it brings it up, there's this purge. And then you're allowed to, you can move through it. And again, it's one of my gifts. I'm not someone who's just going to allow something to be, or they say like an elephant in the room, but nobody's saying anything. I accept, I accept my weaknesses, and I also bet on my strengths. And so for being a truth teller and to clear energy and not sweeping things under the rug, as much as probably my mom has been one that she would rather not have certain conversations, I said, I give you credit. I said, in so many ways, this is where, so if you really even take the humor of it too, I remember saying this to her at one point too. I said, I think your idea of here, you're going to adopt this little girl, and here all of the fantasies and the ideas that she had, and desires for my life, right? And what she would have wanted, right? I turned out to be the exact opposite, in the sense of whether it's the religion, my life path in certain ways, but at her core, and just in the authenticity that I am, and the being that I am, I know that there is this, and my way of loving, because this is also in it, even my name being connected with rain and forgiveness in those ways. It's part of who I am. And so in many ways, I think there was a part where even for her, she would have felt that the estrangement and me withholding love from her would have been justified, based on in full acknowledgement of her parenting skills and conditioning and all of those kinds of things. And it speaks to the being that I am, and the fact that we have been able to navigate and come to a place of radical acceptance. But I remember saying, it must be difficult for you as well. This was in my 20s. I think this was before, after motherhood. After I became a mother and spent the first years in Indonesia with my son. But I remember coming back then to the States, and even having that experience of who I am as a mother, my choices with my son, completely different ways of being and relating, pretty profound and amazing, but authentic to me. And in many ways, I think that was probably the only time I remember receiving a compliment from her, was when she acknowledged and she could see the way that I related to my son. And in parenting, it cast a ray and shed a light on what was really out of alignment for her, which again, the saying, right? You usually will either do what's happened to you, or you will interrupt the program and cycle. And for her, this is where, again, it's not shame and blame. It's what it is of how you parent, how you live. Everything is a choice and different things. And sometimes there is a sacred contract there. So in my case, I'll speak for myself. It was what it was. The way that I was raised, parenting, limited exposure to different beings growing up of my own, culture, skin, representations, faces that looked like mine, that didn't come until much later in my own vision quest and such. But it was a part of my path. It's a part of who I be. And I wouldn't change any of it. And I'm pretty grateful. And I think also there's a comedic piece as much as I've taken very seriously my path and my role as a womb shaman, as a mother, all of the things, deep down, I am a comedian because I am the first one to make jokes. I remember one of the trips back to the United States and getting a passport. And for some reason, my mom and I were in the car together. We went to the post office. We went something. We were in the car together. We both went into the post office. And there was somebody at the desk who, said, "Oh, I recognize this address." And then she looked at me, and then she looked at my mom, and we looked nothing alike. And I said, "Yeah, my mom had I know what you're thinking, but my mom had an affair with the mailman." And my mom, in her 80s, can just laugh like everything of who she is. She doesn't have the same comedy and different things, but she's had to learn over the years how I speak, how I relate, my comfort in my own skin, and with, calling a thing a thing. You're standing there, and I mean, that's been was my whole life of like, one of these does not look like the others. Like, it was clear that I was the black sheep, and I was, this is the energy. So I learned to just roll with it and to not try to pretend, and I wasn't trying to hide. Yeah. So that's where, again, there's kind of a long running joke that her and I have. I said it's probably difficult as conservative and straight-laced and concerned in those ways that you have a daughter who like totally pops out of every single box that you have ever desired and wanted for your child. Yeah. Life will do that. All right. I think that's all I want to say. Oh my goodness. This is long. Well, I want to share one more piece because it feels really, really, really important. It is, it's written by Laura Matsu Gunther. The Orphan's Journey to Individuation. To truly individuate and become the person you are meant to be, you must first embrace the experience of being an orphan. An orphan understands that no external parent, biological or symbolic, will come to save them. This includes not only our literal parents, but also the projected saviors we seek in relationships, authority figures, institutions, or ideologies. You must allow yourself to fully feel the abandonment of the world in order to find yourself. This means surrendering the fantasy that a mother or father figure will rescue you, and instead stepping into the role of reparenting your inner child. When you stop waiting for salvation and begin nurturing yourself, you discover the divine parents within, your own inner source of wisdom, love, and guidance. Saving the orphan within transforms it into a child of magic, one whose power lies in becoming the very love it always longed for. When the orphan is freed from its prison, it is no longer stuck in survival. It can grow, mature, and step into wholeness. This is the path of individuation, not waiting to be saved, but becoming the fully realized adult you were always destined to be.